instead, what it seems like is that it seems like we're a caucus of people that's caught up in semantics. We're caught up in being overly critical of one another. We're not very warm and friendly to our fellow neighbors at the conference, let alone people that aren't even activists. So we're going to bring up some really challenging issues, and we don't want people to necessarily agree with us or disagree with us. But the way I'm going to lead into the discussion is I'm going to talk about direct action, militant direct action, and obviously it has some consequences. Benjamin, you're going to probably talk about, your involvement with the prison system itself, its effects on you and its effects on others. Mo is going to be talking about prisons in general. And all three of us, we all agree on one level, and that is that prisons should be abolished, whether they be for animals or for people. We are for the abolition of prisons, and that is a very far-reaching term, and some people say, hey, we're crazy. But these are discussions that we want to have with everybody and get other people's feelings on. So the first thing I want to ask from people, and I think that someone already did this in a prior talk, is how many of you are animal rights activists or would consider yourself to be animal rights activists? And it's okay for them. Okay. That's about more than half of you. And then, how many of you agree about the idea that animals are deserving of some sort of intrinsic rights? Again, more than half of you. And lastly, now we get into the murkier waters for the mainstream and also for activists as part of the activist community. Like, how do you feel about direct action? Things like property destruction, things like militant direct action, harassment, things like that on behalf of the animal nations. How do you feel about that? If you agree with it, raise your hands. It's, again, more than half of you. And it's okay if some of you don't. And if some of you don't want to raise your hand because you're uncomfortable, because you think that you're the minority here, it's okay to think that too. Obviously, we're not going to harp on this because a lot of us here are animal rights activists. What animals are enduring every single day are atrocities. An animal that's inside a cage right now only knows its cage. If it had any sense of freedom prior to being in that cage, all it wants is to be back to that. And it's very difficult for us as human beings to say that we know what's best for animals and we know exactly how they think, because I, as Andy Stepanian, don't know how a mink thinks. I don't know how a monkey thinks. I don't know their behavioral traits. But I do know basic needs of those animals because I share the basic instincts and needs as a fellow animal of those animals, that they want to be free. They don't want to suffer. They don't want to see their family members suffer, things like that. They don't want to incur pain in their lives. So these are immediate needs of those animals. And as a community of activists, there are people that now decide to push the envelope. There are different niches that all people fall into in their activism. And what I would say is that because those animals are in need right now, we should take action right now to assure that those animals can be put into a safe place. And obviously strategy comes into mind. You don't want to be indiscriminate with your actions, but we should go places, we should take actions that would directly result in animals being free from exploitation and abuse. Whether that be stopping a live export, whether that be breaking into a laboratory and freeing an animal, whether that be breaking into a fur farm and letting those mink free, that's immediate and a need of those animals right now. And that's something that I would encourage on site. I would encourage in something that I feel in my life is important for those animals, and it's important to me because I empathize with the plight of those animals there. Now, with that said, that's very serious. Because what we just talked about right now is criminal in this state of affairs that we're living in right now. So now we're talking about people going out and doing something that is criminal, that now challenges their own personal freedoms, that challenges their life, that challenges their own comfort zone, and tell them to go, and regardless of your instinct to stay safe and where you want to be, we want you to go past that. We want you to break into a lab, we want you to do this, and risk time in jail. And that's where people all of a sudden stop. And that's okay, because it's okay to be afraid. It's okay to be afraid. And I would never incite someone to go and do something that's way beyond their boundaries, because that's irresponsible. And so when we talked about militant direct action in the title, we looked at this title, there's a lot of indiscriminate action that does happen across the country. There's a lot of people that see a PETA video, and they get enraged about what they see, and they take indiscriminate action of, breaking one window at a McDonald's here and breaking the window of a fur shop here. And without a strategic focus, sometimes their efforts are spread thin. Does that make their actions any less noble or any less worthy of respect? Of course not. It makes him very worthy of respect. What we started seeing, especially as direct action as a culture, started developing in areas of the country, particular areas like Salt Lake City, like Long Island, where I'm from. You start seeing these blossomings of actions happening. Sometimes it was in correlation with the music scene, but sometimes it was not. Sometimes it had to do with an art culture that was in the community. Sometimes it had to do with the community space. But people started getting fired up and decided to start taking action because they were enraged by something they saw. But they started taking action without knowing their own personal boundaries. And then what happened was this. People, when faced with being in a police headquarters or an FBI office, being interrogated, being told, hey, so-and-so, your friend is snitching on you, or something else like that, all of a sudden these people started rolling over on one another. This happened a ton of times in Salt Lake City. This happened a lot in Long Island, where I'm from. And I was snitched on myself. And that resulted in me going to jail. So I've been to prison myself, and I was a prisoner for a total aggregate of about 11 and a half months in prison because of breaking some windows at a fur shop. So with that said, I don't have any regrets for what I did, but I think about my partner in that action in the beginning. And I think about how my partner at that moment saw a lot of things that enraged him and told him he's got to get involved, he's got to do this. And maybe he wasn't doing it with a completely level head. So when you look at animal abuse and you see one of these videos, it's a tearjerker. It makes you upset. It makes you scared. You want to do something about it. You want to see something happen right now. And all those instincts that you get there, that's normal. That's what it is to be a caring human being. What you got to do when you start taking these actions, if you ever choose to do so, is you need to figure out a way of purging those feelings from yourself. Because you need a clean slate when you start taking actions to know that I'm ready to do the allotted time in jail assigned to this crime that I'm about to commit. That you're ready to deal with a situation of potential violence at that laboratory if a security guard decides to bludgeon you with something or tries to tackle you or things like that. You need to think of all these consequences, and the only way you're going to be able to do it is not 10 minutes after you watch that video and get yourself fired up. You need to do that in your calmest moment. So if you're all fired up and say, I want to go do something, wait a week. Then go someplace, go to a beautiful park, be by yourself, be with your thoughts, and then try to transplant yourself to being in jail. Try to transplant yourself to being a victim of violence. Figure out how far and how much you can handle. And instead of going into this far-reaching territory of, watching a Meet Your Meat video and burning down a McDonald's, what I would suggest that people do is find out where their boundaries are and just push their boundaries ever so slightly. Because it's always good to challenge yourself, but don't challenge yourself to an extreme. The best way to put this is if you ever got comfortable writing a letter, but you never went to a protest, then go to a protest. If you only feel comfortable going to a protest, then maybe go to a home protest. If you're going to a home protest for a while, then maybe go to a home protest and splash some paint on somebody's house. Okay? These are things where you're pushing your boundaries a little bit, but not to the point of, I saw this video, I got upset, and I burnt down a fur feed co-op and rolled over on all my friends and a bunch of other people that weren't involved just because I knew some names, and now the entire community is suffering. That in turn hurts animals themselves, because those above ground activists that might not have had anything to do with you now are not out in the streets doing what they need to do to help animals. So what people should do, and this is again just my opinion, is people should realize that these atrocities are happening. People should be taking action. People should not just go to these summits or demonstrations or conferences and think about what happens to animals or how we communicate as an activist community. People should figure out, what can I do when I leave here to leave an impact? And that might result in you going to prison. And if so, us as an activist community, that's where we need to once again reconvene and come back together to do something called prisoner support. And there's flyers here that we want to give out to everybody about a friend of ours named Josh Demmett. Josh Demmett, once again, was the victim of someone rolling over on him, someone that got scared. But they broke into Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, and they freed, I think,